I'll say this for him, he's consistent.
Well, he's been so consistent all year.
Not the taste, consistency.
Consistently, yes.
Consistency!
Thanks, losers.
And here we are back again for the Fantasy Football Consistency Show. I am your host, Bob Lung at Big Guy Fantasy Sports, joined as always by my good friend Ron Rigney from Florida, who's enjoying the beautiful weather down there as we are up here, and had an interesting incident today for Ron as his members of his family were in the plane that had to take an emergency landing in Orlando because a bird flew into the engine. I'm glad everybody's okay, glad they're safe, but welcome. And, you really shouldn't send those carrier pigeons into the planes like that. That's just, you'll get caught.
Yeah, we gotta get around that. We got email, we've got
Right,
UPS.
exactly.
We can send things like that. Yeah, I've been up a while. I had to do the airport run. I had to get up at about 3:45 to do that, and I've done quite a bit today. I've mowed my grass. I've taken my kids to the pool. But yeah, no, they landed in Orlando. Everybody's safe and sound, but
That's
still kind of a crazy ordeal. And they did make it back onto Milwaukee, and so life is good. But man, yeah, that's crazy.
It's not a phone call you want. At least it's a phone call that says, "Hey, we landed okay," but
yeah. Only my family would be on that flight for sure. So
yeah, well,
anyway.
as long as it's a positive thing, that's okay.
Yes.
But,
yes.
So we're back. We took off a couple weeks there. Just life got in the way as always, and we're good to be back. And this is our last week of looking at xConsistency and looking at the positions of them. And we're on tight ends, and we'll be talking about tight ends, their current ADPs versus our rankings. Everything has pretty much been in line. There hasn't been too significant changes. As far as we know, Jordan Reed has not hurt himself today. So I think they said he was not starting on the PUP list, which is a good thing. But, it's only a matter of time for him. But we'll be going through all of that this week. But first, we're going to kind of go through some kind of updated news and notes. A lot of stuff going on. Not a ton because, again, training camps are just getting open. Some have been there, some have not. But today was kind of, I think, I'll call it PUP Day. A lot of people decisions were made to who went on the PUP list and who did not. Someone who did is D'Onta Foreman for the Houston Texans. They still are very concerned about him starting week one. As anybody who listens to the show knows, we are big fans, at least undervalued fans, of our good friend Lamar Miller, who we call PB&J Miller because that's what you get. You know what you're getting. It's good. It's consistent, and we like it. But he's nothing fancy. It's not PB&J with horseradish sauce. It's just PB&J. And that's what we get with Lamar Miller, and that's okay because we like his consistency. And, I'm drafting him as an RB3 in many leagues as a backup, and I think that's a great spot to get him. But with Foreman not being ready and going on the PUP, that certainly gives us a little bit better feeling, about him starting the season as the starter, which we're kind of expecting anyway. But it also kind of gives us a better feeling that he may see a lot more games and they won't replace him too quickly, which, again, I'm not sold that they're going to replace him that quick, even when Foreman is healthy, because if he performs like he did with Deshaun Watson on the field like last year, I don't think there's going to be any kind of argument that he needs to be there or not. He will be there. So your thoughts on Foreman PUP list, our PB&J boy, and what do you think about that going forward?
I think that I like Foreman's upside. He's a big back. He's 6 foot 230. So the thing with him is when he's in there and healthy, I think they might look to get him some goal line carries so he could vulture some touchdowns. But I did like what I saw from him when he was carrying the ball last year. But I don't know necessarily if he's shown enough to where they're going to trust him a whole lot. Like you described our guy Lamar Miller perfectly. He's just consistent. What you're getting solid numbers, RB3 type numbers out of him. I think, like you said, that's a great place to have him. And I don't know that, like I said, if we've seen enough out of Foreman for him to get a huge role just yet. Now, I'm not saying it couldn't happen. especially if he comes back healthy and Miller gets hurt or he's underperforming or they feel like they just want to make it more of a timeshare. I don't think that's such a bad thing. So, we were kind of talking about this off air. If you're drafting Lamar Miller, Foreman's a guy you might want to stash later on, but you got to also have a big enough bench too, because if he is on the pup, he is recovering from a torn Achilles, which could be a factor as far as when you think of a running back stopping and planting and making cuts. That's pretty crucial to have that Achilles 100% healthy for that as well. So he's a guy you might want to handcuff, but just understand you're not going to get anything out of him possibly for a while.
Right. I've had both ACL surgery and Achilles surgery. I tore both of them in half. I have to say it took me a lot longer to get back to playing organized sports at my level, and I understand that, with the Achilles than it was for me to get back with the ACL. So I have to agree that I think that he's not as close as even we think. So, but again, they're professional athletes, and I get that, and they certainly have everything available to them to get them back faster. But I just saying, in my mind, I think the Achilles is a little bit more difficult because of that push-off factor. Every time you make that push, where ACL, it's kind of a plant and turn and spin and push off too. But it just seemed like it was a whole different animal when I was trying to play sports the next year. So anyway, on the good side of the pup, which those who avoided it were our two number 2 and number 3 ranked quarterbacks on our list, Deshaun Watson and Carson Wentz. I honestly think I've done 6 or 7 drafts, and I think I have one or the other just about every team except one. I think I have Drew Brees on one. But definitely love both of these guys, with both of them being healthy, avoiding pup. That's really a good sign that they will be ready week 1. Really excited about both of them. Again, both of them avoided pup. I think even if Wentz, who was I think the closest to it, would have been, I think they both were going to start week 1, and I certainly have no fear of, again, drafting them where I've been drafting them, which is about the 5th or 6th round, or buying them in auctions. I think I paid $16 for Wentz in a 200 cap, so I think it's pretty fair. I think Rodgers went for about 23 or 24, so I feel like that was where I expect him to be. Not a great value, but certainly a solid value. Any thoughts on the 2 quarterbacks?
I just think it's going to be interesting to see just how that affects ADP. I'm looking at the sort of ADP right here, and it hasn't really affected it a whole lot. The news just kind of came out, but it'd be interesting to see, especially if Watson moves ahead of Wilson, because they're right there. Consensus picks 54 and 56, quarterback 2 and 3. So that's one thing I'll be looking at. I'll also be interested to see because as I'm looking at the ADPs here for quarterbacks, Carson Wentz is sitting there at QB6, and he's got Tom Brady and that guy in Carolina ahead of him as well. And I would definitely take Carson Wentz over both of them.
Absolutely.
So that'll be interesting to see if he shoots up a little bit. But I would say that it probably shoot him up a couple spots. But it's all around good news, especially if you've already invested in him, because you've gotten maybe a little bit of a discount just because that was kind of up in the air. But I think that might be over with.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I feel like there's just way too much name recognition with Brady and Newton sitting at number 4 and 5 that I don't think Wentz will pass them. Let's just say I would be shocked, because we know some of the so-called experts out there who are loving Cam Newton and putting them on their teams, and so I just have there's no way. I mean, we know that. Wentz was very consistent until he went down. He was certainly way ahead of those 2 guys, and that's why I have him number 3 on my list, and have Brady at 5 and the other guy at 12. So yeah, there's no way those 2 guys are going to be on my teams. I'll almost guarantee it. So as we move on, this week there was an announcement that Josh Gordon had some issues. And I know, the hair on the back of my neck stood up when I read this or heard this, because I was like, oh no, here we go. And I thought for sure something was really, really wrong, and that suspensions were on the way, and here we go. And, just when we thought the Browns had some hope, the hope was dashed. But, I mean, again, we're still not 100% sure, but it appears that he has some anxiety issues and he's working through that. Obviously, the management of the Browns have no sympathy for anxiety, or they don't have any anxiety problems, because they thought it would be a great idea to possibly go out and get Mr. Anxiety, Des Bryant, to come to this team to help. And I was thinking, I can't think of a worse thing to do to bring into this scenario than a guy that just breathes anxiety in Des Bryant. I get that they might need another wide receiver, but I got to believe that there's somebody that would bring less anxiety to the field than Des Bryant. So I want nothing to do with this man on my Cleveland Browns, not now when they finally are doing something right. I just don't think it's worth the headaches. Any thoughts on your behalf?
No, same thing. I mean, you would think that they could have found somebody else that's unemployed at the moment. You might even want to call up Jerry Rice and see what he's doing at this point. Because
exactly.
At least he could be maybe another coach on the field. But yeah, I don't think that that's going to be a solid way to solve that problem with him being out. So right. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. Aren't the Browns the team on Hard Knocks?
Right. Yeah. So yeah. Maybe,
okay,
and you know what? And maybe that is part of it. I didn't even think of it until you mentioned it. But nothing breeds anxiety probably more than being under the gun at a football camp, which is tough enough, and then to have cameras in your face judging everything you do. That's probably going to bring a lot of anxiety to a lot of players. And if you've got a bigger problem with it than others, which appears Mr. Gordon does, it's probably best to just keep him out of that scenario and keep him out of that limelight, because you know damn well that those reporters would follow him like paparazzi. Just anywhere he would go, they would be right on his tail trying to catch him doing something. So that does make a lot of sense now, that maybe that's really the issue, is that they're just going to keep him out of that TV show, and good for them if that's what they're doing. So last one, and I found this interesting. Ron Rivera, so head coach Ron Rivera, has mentioned in press conferences that he hopes that McCaffrey gets 25 to 30 touches a game. If that's true, then maybe he is worth the middle of the second round ADP that he's currently going at. That's a lot of touches for for him. I really thought, but then again, that's a head coach, probably coach speak. Norv Turner still the OC, and Norv Turner likes the power back and C.J. Anderson. So we'll have to wait and see how this plays out. It could be just somebody throwing, Rivera just throwing that out there just to see what kind of reaction he gets. But again, McCaffrey's going middle of the second round. I'll be honest with you, I haven't had a chance to draft him there, and if I did, I probably would be drafting Jordan Howard before him anyway. If I'm at that spot, so I'm staying away from him. And not that he's not good, I'm just kind of worried that I just don't know what's really going on there when you've got a guy like Norv Turner at OC and Ron Rivera at head coach. How much how much that coach speak is really going to play out. So, your thoughts on McCaffrey?
Well, I don't think I've gotten him anywhere either, and he's kind of stared me in the face a couple times, and I just haven't pulled the trigger. Whether it's auction, whether it's drafts, whatever it may be, I'll be interested to see how the passing attack from the wide receiver and the tight end standpoint, if that takes away some of his catches, and that might limit some of those touches as well, because that's a lot of touches for a guy that's his size. I mean, that's a lot of touches for a guy in general. If he gets that many, and a couple things I think about. Number one, I'm anxious to see what Greg Olsen is going to bring to the table this year. Even with him kind of being off when he came back a little bit, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I remember looking it up, and I know that it ate into Christian McCaffrey's targets a little bit. They've added a few guys at wide receiver. Now, nobody huge, but it'll be interesting to see how that kind of affects his touches, and I'm also interested to see how many of those touches first couple weeks are handoffs and not necessarily passes of some type. So that it kind of hinges on that as well, because that's a hell of a lot of targets for one guy to get.
Yeah, I mean, that's Le'Veon Bell-esque. I mean, yeah. Bell, Gurley, those kind of guys get 25, 30 touches a game because they're a three-down back. there's not too many like that, and but they're a whole different breed in my mind. I mean, Gurley's built better. Zeke, Zeke, I guess, is in that realm as well, and David Johnson. But in all those cases, these guys, have proved that they're worthy of that. McCaffrey hasn't yet. Again, not that he's not a talented playmaker, and he certainly needs to get the ball, and I appreciate the fact that Rivera wants that to happen. But why did you go get C.J. Anderson then?
Yeah.
So,
well, plus too, when you mention like Zeke Elliott, when you mention David Johnson, when you mention Le'Veon Bell, and you hear 25, 30 touches a game, you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But when you hear it mentioned with Christian McCaffrey, it's kind of like, I wonder how they're going to get that to work, because that's
right.
a lot of target. Like you said, why would they bring in C.J. Anderson if they're not going to get him the rock a little
right.
bit too? So
now, I did also read that McCaffrey put on some muscle, and he's up to like 212 pounds now versus I think 204 something he played last year. So he's preparing for it. Again, he's a hell of an athlete. So if we get McCaffrey, which maybe I will, maybe I won't. We'll see how that plays out. But I kind of want to see what happens in preseason first before I'm going to get too crazy with that scenario. So, all right, so there's our news and notes. Some interesting stuff going on. Obviously, training camps are opening, so the fever is getting hotter and hotter by the day for us to for our excitement for fantasy season. So, as I mentioned, this week we're going to wrap up our series we've been doing with xConsistency and review of ADPs. Over the next 4 weeks, our goal is to kind of help you with your draft prep by position each week. We'll start with quarterbacks next week with that, with some new information, some new articles that will be coming up on the website. So we'll keep an eye on that for sure. For those of you who are kind of listening for the first time, you're like, what is this consistency all about? I did not try to promote the book early on, so shame on me. But the Fantasy Football Consistency Guide is out on Amazon. You can get that. That's the hard copy version there. If you want the PDF version, all the access to all the reports on Big Guy Fantasy Sports, you can come there as well and get that. If you want to have both, you want the hard copy, go to Amazon, buy the book. In there, it will say, email me your receipt from Amazon, and I'll give you a code, and you can upgrade to the VIP package for only $10 more. So good deal there that you don't want to miss out on. So as we look at the tight ends, they're definitely very, very well tiered. Even though we tier our own tight ends in our tiered draft list that you can get in the guide and online. The ADPs are tiered almost exactly the same, and the only thing different is obviously the gaps in the rounds between them. The first 3 picks, and you can decide if you want Kelsey, Ertz, or Gronkowski to be your number 1, 2, or 3. I've seen people say that they'd rather have Kelsey, and some say they'd rather have Ertz. But needless to say, everybody is picking those 3 as the top 3 off the board. But more importantly, they are drafting them in the 2nd and 3rd rounds. Gronkowski and Kelsey's ADP is 22 and 24, and Ertz's is 32. So these guys are going off for round 2, round 3. Now, for those of you who've been listening to the podcast and read the book or haven't read the book, you'll know that we love Gronkowski, Kelsey, and Ertz, and they're certainly some of the most consistent tight ends in the league, but they're not that much better, because when you look at the next group of Olsen, Graham, Ingram, Walker, and Rudolph, all of these guys have been in the 65 to 75, 80% range at some point in their careers and have proven their consistency, and they're being drafted in rounds 5, 6, 7. And so, therefore, we are highly recommending to everybody in the book and on the show, and anybody who emails me or hits me up on Twitter, hey, Bob, what do you think about tight ends? And I say to them pretty much, I think you need to either get Walker, Rudolph, or Ingram or Graham in rounds 6 and 7. And that's pretty much what I'm telling people. I love Gronk, Kelsey, and Ertz, and they're definitely very, very good, and they were the top 3 last year. And their consistency was 79, 79, and 80%. Actually, Kelsey was the highest at 80. But Rudolph was 75, Ingram was 73, Walker was 70, Watts, so there's people there that are just close enough. And yes, there's a few more points differential between them, but you're only talking about maybe 2 points a week max on average that you're missing out on. So what are your thoughts, Ron? I mean, that's where I kind of stand right now looking at the tight end position. I don't think any of the ADPs are out of whack based on their value. It's just a question of going early or going in the middle rounds, and we feel that the best value is in those middle rounds.
Yeah, you kind of made the argument for me there. It's one of those things where, we talked a little bit about it with quarterback as well. How early of a pick are you willing to spend on this spot? And it's not to say that, you're totally neglecting the tight end position, because like you said, you get Gronk, Kelsey, or Ertz, it's definitely going to give you a little bit of an advantage, but I don't know if it's enough of an advantage to go ahead and spend that early pick, pick 50, pick 32, 24, 22, where their ADPs are kind of at. I'd rather load up at running back or receiver, or maybe grab my quarterback around there if I want to spend up for one of those guys. And then, like you said, I'm targeting these guys later on, because when I look at my teams, I got a lot of Kyle Rudolph. I got my boy Jack Doyle if we go down a little bit further. I know you're a big Jimmy Graham guy. You got him on a couple of teams. Delaney Walker, I think I got on one. I don't hate Evan Ingram, especially coming off the season they had last year where he was kind of the only option. I think it's going to help him to have a little bit more consistency there. I think Eli Manning will be a little bit better. I don't know if I'm ready to invest in him just yet, but I think Ingram will be pretty good. So yeah, I'm all about waiting. And there's a couple of these guys too that we don't know much about, that either had we had a limited look at them last year, or they kind of came out. They were a backup that kind of came out of nowhere. Kind of talking about Trey Burton there, who we'll get out here in a minute. But yeah, I think you definitely have to wait on this spot, because I'm not giving pick 22 to a tight end. I'd rather get a running back or receiver there.
Right, exactly. And like I said, it's certainly something that most people. Now, the guy that's probably the most intriguing, and I think is the one that I wanted to discuss and I did not talk about, is the guy who's sitting now currently at tight end number 4. His pick is ADP is 53. So, we're looking at basically in the 5th round, early 5th round. And that's Greg Olsen. And, Greg Olsen has always been one of my favorites, one of the most consistent tight ends in the league. And then last year just made me feel really uncomfortable. Now, injuries are injuries, and I'm perfectly fine. I understand that's the way the game is played. People are going to get hurt. So, Olsen missed, quite a few games last year, with injuries. And, he came back. He missed half the season, so he only played in 7 games. Now, Jordan Reed misses lots of games, but when he's on the field, he's always pretty consistent. He'll be 3 for 4 because he only played 4 games, or he'll be 6 out of 7 or 6 out of 9. He's always right there consistency-wise. But last year, Greg Olsen was 1 for 7 in the games that he did play. And that just kind of scares me to death, because I would have expected him that when he came back, he was healthy enough to play. And he did have his one big game in week 15 or something that, everybody's like, oh, there he is. He's fine. He's healthy. And then the next week, he took a dump again. And so like I said, I'm a little concerned about Olsen to a point where this year I'm just not touching him. Usually if I'm in the spot where it's time for me to pick and I'm in the 5th or 6th round or 7th round, I'm looking at Graham, Ingram, Walker, Rudolph. If Olsen's there, I just ignore him like I don't see him. I just don't want anything to do with him. Now, there are people out there that are still like, yep, Olsen's the man. He was always been the man. They love him. Him and Cam have certainly have a great relationship on the field, but I just can't do it this year. And I may kick myself and may go, man, I wish I would have done it. He might go and get back to his 70%, 80% consistency, and I'll be wrong. And that's fine, because I'm hoping that, the 4 that I mentioned will also be just as consistent, and, it won't hurt me. But I'm just a little scared. That 1 for 7 just scares me to death this year. Are you feeling the same way? Do you have a different thought? Are you just kind of waiting to preseason to see how he plays? What are your thoughts on Greg Olsen?
Well, it's one of those things too. There's things that there's I'm on the fence, I guess, because I don't have him anywhere. I think it's more of a function of I'd rather wait even beyond him to get my tight end. I think the same argument you can kind of make for the thing we talked about with Christian McCaffrey might be the Greg Olsen thing as well. In reverse, and what I mean by that is I hadn't heard that they're wanting to get McCaffrey the ball that much, but that could be a function of maybe they are taking some targets away from Greg Olsen because maybe they want to kind of preserve him a little bit, possibly. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
But
right.
those targets have to come from somewhere. They can't just create them out of the blue. One of the arguments for him, though, as much as we're not fans of Cam Newton does like to throw to Greg Olsen. He's one of his favorite targets. He's been one of his most consistent. We talk about consistency all the time. He's been one of his most consistent targets that he's like to get the ball to. So he does have that going for him. But I don't know. It's just I guess I got a little bit scared off, kind of like you said, because we saw that big week and then a couple of clunkers after that. So I'm probably not going to draft him most places, and it's not really just because I'm scared of him. It's just because I don't necessarily, we talked about I don't want to spend picks 22, 24, or 32. I don't know if I really want to spend pick 53 on a tight end either. So I'm going to wait just because of I like some of the guys later on just as much, and I'm going to get a bigger value on them.
Right. Exactly. And, like I said, I kind of like the proven consistency for more than 1 year. And even though Evan Ingram certainly only had 1 year, I still like him. He's probably fourth out of that group. I'm usually looking at Rudolph first, Walker second, Graham, and then Ingram. So again, most of the time I've got one of those three on my team. I don't have an Ingram yet, any shares of Ingram yet. It's mostly been Rudolph and Graham and Walker. But again, it's more just because if I am going to take that pick in round 6 for somebody, tight end, because usually what I've been doing is getting 4 running backs or wide receivers, a combination thereof, in the first 4 rounds. Round 5, I'm usually grabbing Deshaun Watson, and then round 6, I'm getting my tight end. That's what I've been on a normal basis in a normal league. The weird thing is that I don't think I've drafted in only one actual, real, honest-to-goodness, just straight PPR, half PPR so far, because Scott Fishbowl, the Eliminators, the one that I was doing with Jim Day from Fighting Chance Fantasy. I don't know if I ever showed you the scoring method for that bad boy. It's so unique that each position has its own uniqueness in scoring. So, like, instead of 1 point PPR all around, it's 0.8 for the wide receivers and 0.6 for the running backs and 0.7 for the tight ends, or 1.2 for the tight ends. I don't remember. Just all kinds of weird stuff. The touchdowns are different points. I think running back rushing touchdown is like 7, and it's just all over the board. So, like I said, I haven't really gotten into maybe 1 or 2 straight PPR drafts, but when I have, that's pretty much what my strategy has been, and that's where I've been picking those guys. But let's talk about those guys in the next tier. Now, the first one is Jordan Reed. And as we've said multiple times for multiple years, if Jordan Reed could sign a contract and guarantee us 16 games on the field, all game, playing, not every down, but in regular sense of the word, he'd be in the top 5 in my mind, because he's always had the consistency, but he's never stayed healthy, and that's why he's sitting at tight end number 9, which I don't even think I have him that high. I think I have him as number 12. Is there any chance you're drafting Jordan Reed for any reason? I know I'm not.
No.
Okay.
And it's for what you said. I mean, you know what's going to happen.
Right.
It's one of those things where, I kind of called him for a while one of my Charlie Brown guys that, you keep getting tricked into that same thing every time, and
Right.
every time you do it, it's going to work out this time, and then the ball gets pulled from you every time. And I've done that a couple of years with Jordan Reed, and it's happened every time, and it's something I don't want to mess with, because there's in that tier, you can take Kyle Rudolph, you can take Jack Doyle, you can take George Kittle. I'm much rather on board with those guys than I am something where I could get potentially maybe 4 games of great production, and I would gladly trade that for a Trey Burton, a Jack Doyle, George Kittle, where I get probably 12 to 13 games of good production. So, no, thank you.
Well, and Tyler Eifert can be thrown into that realm as well, even though his ADP is 153, so he's way out there. But I think I read, I don't know if it was Reed or Eifert, but I read that he's missed more games than he's played in his career.
It's probably Eifert.
I think it's Eifert. I think it was 47 versus 39.
Yeah, because I think Reed's close, but I think it is Eifert. I think you're right. And he's another one that they're not sure if he's going to be ready for week 1 or not. Imagine that. So
right, surprise.
Bumps up
so Tyler Kroft could be moved up again because he wasn't too bad when he was in there last year. In fact, 44% consistent, 17th and 16th in total points, 17th in consistency. So there's potential there for a guy like Tyler Kroft way late as well.
Real quick too, because I'm looking at Tyler Kroft here towards the bottom. He's moved up 16 spots, so I think that must speak to the fact that Eifert's going to be out. But he was a guy that Colby and I went with a couple weeks and consistently cashing last year, and he scored touchdowns, which was big just because we were kind of throwing a dart to save some money, and he worked out more often than not when we got him. So he's a guy you might look at real late especially if you need a backup.
Right. I assume that was against the Browns because I think the Browns and the Giants were Browns and Giants that seemed to give up a touchdown to a tight end almost every week.
I know the Giants were awful against tight ends. I think we targeted them about every week with our tight end on the Cashin article. So, all
right. So, in this next tier, the 3 guys that I know that you're a fan of, and I am as well. So Jordan Reed, like I said, ADP was 91. At 93 is Trey Burton. At 116 is Jack Doyle, and at 124 is George Kittle. I totally agree with you that if you don't want to take that tight end in round 6 or 7, that one of these 3 guys would be excellent value in rounds basically 9, 10, 11. All 3 of them, now Burton and Kittle really have a limited sample size to look at because Burton kind of was just outstanding when he replaced Zach Ertz when he was off the field. But, he's in Chicago with a quarterback that I think will use him early and often. Kittle was fantastic over the last few games of the year with Garoppolo at hand. And Jack Doyle, was very consistent last year, was 4th in total points. Now, granted, it was with Jacoby Brissett. But let's be honest, even with Andrew Luck back and healthy, outside of T.Y. Hilton, what else has he got to throw to? So I think these guys are all great values. Certainly understand if you wanted to wait. If you're in one of these big contest leagues where you're getting some significant points per reception for tight ends where you get 1.5 or it's a 2 tight end starting scenario, then I think one of these 3 guys should be your number 2 for sure. But I know you're going to express your love for Doyle and Kittle, so I'll just let you just pour the love out. I won't even ask how you think because I know how you think.
Well, and even me going non-homer with Jack Doyle. I mean, in a PPR last year, for where you got him at, in some leagues he may not even have went drafted.
Oh, probably not.
Yeah. So I mean, and if he did, he went late. But in PPR leagues especially, he didn't put up huge flashy numbers, but once again consistent. I mean, he's one of those guys that he might have 8 catches for 50 yards, and then you might add a touchdown onto that some weeks, and that's awesome production for what you paid for him last year. And I don't see any reason that could be any different, especially with Andrew Luck being at the controls. That was with Jacoby Brissett for the season. And you mentioned George Kittle. Trey Burton's a guy too, and I've kind of expressed this to you. All of a sudden I'm kind of falling in love with Mitch Trubisky a little bit, so we'll see how that goes. But
I don't have a problem with you falling in love with Trey Burton, but you can't fall in love with Trubisky.
I don't know. To me, it's setting up like a nice little scenario for him to be successful.
It's a bad blind date. Don't do it.
That would be the first time I've had
friends draft Mitch Trubisky.
So, but with like you said though, with Trey Burton, he's going to be kind of the security blanket there.
Right.
And I think that that makes him valuable, especially PPR. It might be kind of the same stat lines that you saw to Jack Doyle. You mentioned George Kittle, another guy I like in that range right there. Another guy to lump in there too that's right after George Kittle, the guy that I haven't been able to get anywhere, David Njoku. He's another guy that I think could kind of be in that same category, maybe a high catch guy, maybe not so many yards, not so many touchdowns, but in a PPR league, if you want to wait a little bit longer or have him maybe even as your backup, I think he could put up some numbers as well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I haven't sold myself on Njoku yet, even as a Browns fan. The only thing I think of was with Tyrod Taylor and Charles Clay seem to have a pretty good relationship, but Clay was more of a touchdown guy, which is not necessarily a bad thing for tight ends because pretty much if they score a touchdown, they earn a clutch game. But you've also got so many other weapons like Landry and Gordon and great running back trio there as well. So I'm kind of not sold that there's enough weapons or targets to go around there. So I'm kind of not sold on that yet. But I see what you're getting at. I mean, he certainly has the talent to be that. And, if teams are very, very worried about Landry and Gordon, which they should be, that's going to open up the middle of the field for Njoku. So we might see some – I don't know if we'll see the consistency, but I could see some big games from him. He certainly could be one of those that, if you got a bad tight end defense – Njoku could be the guy that could be in your consistently cashing for sure. So definitely could see some value there. So we got the tiers. So we got our big three that, again, if you want to draft them, that's your call. You're really giving up a lot. We got the mid tier. We got the kind of the third tier. Now let's talk about just basically everybody from that point on. We know there's some value in there. I've identified some myself. But I'm going to let you start and kind of see who, give me one of your guys that you see after Njoku, so basically after pick 150, that might be a great late round pick if you've got a deep bench, or could be, somebody that, you just kind of stash or unless you get real nuts and just wait till way late and pick a tight end, which is kind of rough, but yeah. Give me one of your guys up that you think could provide some good value awfully late.
Well, I mean, going real deep here, I'll kind of start from the back and work my way up here. There's a couple guys at the bottom. I mentioned Tyler Kroft already. He's kind of climbing up a little bit, very touchdown dependent, but a guy that you could plug in as a backup. I've talked about Jake Butt in the past. I think he could be solid there as well if you want to wait. And once again, I wouldn't wait on him as being my tight end one, right. But I think he's worth a late round flyer, especially in a deeper league as a backup. You go up a little bit further around, the 160s to 180 range. We talked about Ben Watson too, how he was successful in New Orleans. He's back there. That's a guy that honestly I'd be okay with having him as if I wanted to wait really, really late. He'd probably be about the only guy in this range I'd feel comfortable having as my tight end one, just because he does have that rapport with Drew Brees, and he was that successful last time he was in New Orleans. Another guy that's on there too that I'm not huge on, but if you need somebody, I think he's more of kind of bye week guy. Austin Seferian-Jenkins came on a little bit at Jacksonville. He's got Blake Bortles there. They've added a few receivers, but I don't think he's going to get a lot of volume. But I think he could be a guy for a touchdown here and there. And then I'll throw Ricky Seals-Jones out there. I'm not really huge on the Ricky Seals-Jones bandwagon, but he's a guy that's getting a lot of buzz. He's up 13 spots on the latest ADP here that we're using, and he's tight end 20 in the ADP right now. So he could be a guy maybe that could see some targets in that offense in Arizona, because there's not a whole hell of a lot after David Johnson and Larry Fitzgerald offensively. So there could be some love for him as well there, but those are probably guys I would go with in that range.
Well, I appreciate you picking that one guy over 150 ADP to let me know which one you like. I think that was 7, but okay. Got to pick on you.
I'm making it easy for you.
I know. I'm like, okay,
I want to let you sit back and just kind of, I
covered
them all.
One,
so that
you
way.
picked 7, so now I get to pick 1. And you picked one I obviously was going to bring up, so now I got to pick some other one that's left over. But
well, I'm guessing that you were going to take Ben Watson. You can talk about.
But I'm going to bring up a different guy just because, again, I know you listen to Sirius Radio, you listen to other podcasts because, again, we want to learn and we want to gain knowledge. And so one of the Sirius Radio shows I was listening to was talking about Mike Gesicki from Miami and the rapport that him and Tannehill are having, that they seem to be gelling very well in camp. and have been since he got there. Again, there isn't much to throw to. Devontae Parker, Kenny Stills are okay receivers. I mean, certainly Landry is gone. So I have to believe that they need to have somebody in the middle just to kind of keep everything in check. And so again, if you're looking late or you want to just, you're in a 2 tight end or, get the tight ends with the 1.5 points per reception, Gesicki's certainly one of those guys that could be a value that late. I'm going to go with Hayden Hurst as well. Again, Baltimore, Joe Flacco really always have loved their tight ends. We know how well Ben Watson did do there last year. Hayden Hurst comes in as a highly drafted rookie. I think was he first round or late or early second? I forget. But certainly was highly picked by the Ravens, and we'll get to see him next Thursday night in the Hall of Fame game. So I'll be watching that live. And so there's a couple guys there that I kind of like. Obviously, if you want anything to do with Jordan Reed, you damn well better handcuff Vernon Davis to him, or you're going to get definitely screwed over. But honestly, I might take Vernon Davis again real late anyway because he's going to play at least 8 games, if not more. So I think there's some good players there. I'm hearing a lot of love for Gerald Everett. I just don't see how in the world Gerald Everett is ever going to see the ball in that offense. There are just so many weapons. But I don't know, we'll wait and see. So that's some of the things I've heard as well, kind of going and listening to, Sirius Radio and some of the other sites and just listening to the knowledge of the people that are in the know and have the connection. So that's our breakdown of tight ends. I think it's one of the deepest I've ever seen from a consistency standpoint. In fact, somebody asked me about, which positions were the most consistent and not consistent. And I said, if you'd asked me a year ago or 2 years ago, I would have said that, the quarterbacks, running backs were usually the most consistent and certainly most dependable from year to year, and tight ends were worst. Last year, it was complete opposite. The tight ends were definitely the most consistent, especially from top to bottom, and the quarterbacks were the worst. So I said, that's what scares me about, who I want this year. I mean, if I'm not drafting Rodgers, which most of the time I'm not because he's going too early, if I'm not drafting, Watson or Wentz or Cousins, I'll get either Breeze or Stafford later, and that's it. I'm basically looking at about 5 guys as my starter. And outside of that, I'll draft others as my backup. I've had Big Ben as my backup. I've drafted, Winston and Rivers and some of those guys. I'll probably be looking at Luck a little bit more now because of his confirmation of his injury seems to be in good shape. But I feel real comfortable about tight ends, and like you said, to a point where, I might, if I don't see one of the guys that I want in the 6th or 7th round, that I'll just like you, wait and get Burton, Doyle, or Kittle. So I think there's a lot of depth there. And like you said, if all else fails, I've got Watson as my backup, or one of those guys you mentioned, one of those 8 or 10 guys you mentioned. So yeah, I think there's some. I think it's one of the better ones. And and when you think about the fact that Witten left and Henry's hurt, I mean, those could have been 2 more consistent guys we would have had to rely on. So it could have been a very, very deep, 12 players. So definitely very comfortable with that group. So let's move on to the xConsistency. So for those of you who are, again, new to the consistency world, the whole idea is to look at players who are, putting up a consistent amount of points every week. So for tight ends in a standard PPR, to get that point, they basically have to go to about 8 points a game, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you see the consistency ratings, you go, oh, it's not as easy as you think. And that pretty much would put them as a starting, worthy of a starting tight end for that week. So it would put them in the top 12 of scoring. And that's kind of what we've always done from a consistency standpoint for tight ends. But in all the positions this year, I decided to kind of take that to another level and created xConsistency, which for your fantasy baseball guys, it's kind of like xERA, which is trying to just help identifying a more truer consistency value of the players. And so the calculation is pretty straightforward. Take fantasy points scored divided by games played, so they get their fantasy points per game, and multiply times the clutch rate. So if you're averaging 20 points a game and you were 100% consistent, your xConsistency is going to be 20. Now, obviously, we didn't have any perfectly consistent tight ends like we did at wide receiver in DeAndre Hopkins. But if you look at the article that's in the Fantasy Football Consistency Guide or on the website, you'll see that, as expected, the big three are there because their consistency was 79 and 80% for each of them. And Gronkowski scored the most points, had the most points per game, so his xConsistency was 12.71. Kelsey's is 12.52, and Ertz's is 11.53. After that, it drops all the way down to the 8s and the 7s. So as there is a kind of a gap in points and consistency, this kind of separates the big three a little bit more than just looking at, Ertz is 79% consistent and Rudolph was 75% consistent. So they should be pretty close. But there was a 54 or a 46-point difference between the two, and that's where this xConsistency kind of separates that and says, yeah, Ertz is definitely much better than Rudolph in a fantasy standpoint. But again, it comes down to the value of, do you want to draft him that early and what are you giving up? But the xConsistency certainly shows why those guys are worthy of those high ADPs. And again, it just comes down to personal preference. As you look at this first group, which includes Gronk, Kelsey, Ertz, Ingram, Doyle, Walker, and Rudolph, because this is ranked in their xConsistency order. Anything, other than Doyle, and anything really jump out to you in the numbers that you see and how that's calculated?
The only thing that there's not a lot of surprises in his first group. Like you said, the big three are there, and then it's usually who you would expect kind of to be there. The one that kind of surprised me is I wouldn't have pegged Evan Ingram to be above the guys that he's above there, Doyle, Walker, and Rudolph, as far as xConsistency. But it makes sense, though, when you think about the numbers it's based upon, where he was kind of the focal point in that offense for a lot of weeks just because of the the injuries to Brandon Marshall and to OBJ, and they didn't have a consistent running game, and Eli Manning was kind of all over the place. So I'd say if any of them kind of surprised me a little bit, I wouldn't have pegged him being the next guy ranked there as far as xConsistency after our big three. Right.
And, points-wise, he's 172.2, Walker's 172.7, and Doyle's 173. So points-wise, they were right there. Consistency-wise, they were pretty close. So, like you said, it is a little bit surprising to see him that much higher. But, certainly we know he had an excellent season, in his rookie year. It is going to be interesting to see now that all the weapons are back, now that they might have a running game, and Barkley, we assume, with pretty good certainty, whether or not we're going to see those kind of point levels and that kind of consistency. And that's kind of why, like I said before, I have Ingram kind of ranked fourth out of that group, because I'm a little leery about him getting back to those numbers with the amount of talent that's back and healthy and around him. But, he's still a great player, and I still think they'll use him when teams try to focus a little bit more on OBJ, double team him. Sterling Shepard's certainly a very good wide receiver too on the other side. So I think that, he'll still see, the targets may not be as extensive, but, you might see more red zone targets, that kind of stuff as well. Again, as teams kind of focus on OBJ in the end zone. So going down to the next tier, we lost Hunter Henry, so there's really just, and Jason Witten. So there's, of the five that are in that tier, there's only really Graham Watson and Jordan Reed. Jordan Reed plays half the game, so it's kind of hard to say, well, his xConsistency is really good. Well, we know that because we said when he's on the field, he's really good. But, again, we all know that the biggest surprise in that section is Ben Watson. And while he didn't have a lot of points, he was ranked 11th in total points. His 69% consistency puts him, about, half a point or about 0.7 below Jimmy Graham, and he ranks him number 9 overall. again, we've talked about this. We talked about it tonight. We've talked about this numerous times. For Ben Watson to be tight end 25, I just don't understand how people look at that and go, oh, yeah, that all seems fine. And why nobody is drafting him except maybe me, you, and Jim Day.
Well, it's crazy to look across his line here and see that he's 11th in total points. He's 7th as far as these ratings here are consistency ratings. So I mean, what's not to like there? And like you said, he's getting back in a great situation with Drew Brees, where he's seen success before, and there's really nothing else there at tight end for him to really compete with that could impede his targets. And it's one of those things that Drew Brees seems like a guy that he's gonna go with what's familiar, and he's gonna throw to the guy that's familiar, and that's definitely what he's got in Ben Watson.
Yeah, no, he's definitely a loyalty kind of guy. I mean, that's why, Darren Sproles did so well when he was there with him, and, because he had that trust factor with Sproles when he got, either close to the end zone or needed that clutch first down. That was the guy he was looking to. And, when he gets into that rapport with somebody like he was with Watson 2 years ago, I got to believe that it's going to continue this year unless, Watson gets hurt or something. But the only thing they really added there was Cameron Meredith, but they also lost Ingram for the first 4 games. So you have to believe that Watson might be used a little bit more in the passing game because, they want to keep teams from stacking the box against Kamara. So I have to believe that he'll continue to do well, and that's why I've been drafting him. I'm sure you have too. The second or the last tier, third tier, I guess, of the group here, which is ranked number 13 through number 20. They're not real high consistency, not real high xConsistency, but we're looking at a lot of guys that some are on the way down, some are maybe on the way up, or could be on the way up if the situation was different. Does anybody jump out at you here that you think, yeah, I can see him moving up to the next tier? When we do this xConsistency next year, we'll probably see this guy in tier number 2 maybe next year.
I mean, depending upon what happens, I want to say O.J. Howard, but the thing with me with Brayton Howard is I feel like if you would have to get both of those guys, and then you'd have to kind of guess which one you're going to get the numbers from, because I think that they're going to get kind of an equal share of what's going on there. If I had to pick one guy, I might go with Tyler Kroft, just because of the fact that he kind of showed last year he's building that trust a little bit with Andy Dalton. I'm not a huge fan of Andy Dalton anyway, but he could kind of be that security blanket, kind of like what you talked about with Drew Brees. And like I said, he's a guy that he scored a few touchdowns when we threw him in the lineup, and he's somebody that I think just kind of based upon what's on that offense could see an increase in targets, and thus kind of creating an increase in consistency for him, maybe up to that second tier. I don't think you'd see him jumping a lot of guys that we have here that we like, but I think Tyler Kroft's a guy that could make a little bit of a jump up there.
Yeah, like you said, boy, if either Brait or O.J. Howard would get hurt and miss the rest of the season in preseason, which I don't wish on anybody, that certainly would put one or the other up there in the top 12 in a heartbeat, because they're both very talented. Certainly were, well liked by Jameis Winston, offensively, but problem was you couldn't figure out which game it would be, and sometimes they did well both in 1 week, and sometimes they both didn't do anything in 1 week. So you couldn't really pin it down to any one thing. Obviously, I like Vernon Davis because I just know that it's just a matter of time before Reed will go down and he'll jump up there. I mean, he was ranked 12th in consistency. I mean, it's only 56%, but we know that tight ends aren't the most consistent overall. Normally, the top 12, but still, it was better than the rest of the tight ends after that. So I think that he certainly could be there, and like you said, it's just a matter of time before Jordan Reed's going to get hurt. And in
that offense too, I mean, he could get targets by default too. I mean, you've got Crowder, right, and there's not a whole lot after that as well. So
right, yeah, it'll be interesting to see the rapport that Alex Smith, being a new quarterback, who he's going to like, who he's going to feel more comfortable with. We might see some of that in the preseason but if they're smart, they might put them both out in the field and use them, with two tight end kind of scenario. I don't know if either one of them are really good blockers. I don't think Davis is, but maybe they can be decoys to each other. But we'll have to wait and see. So that's our xConsistency for tight ends, as we mentioned before. Just kind of a showing a way of kind of separating those players that are close in consistency, close in total points, and where that separation may be in this position. And certainly appreciate any feedback you guys may have, and you can find that in the Fantasy Football Consistency Guide, which you can get again on Amazon if you want the hard copy. If you want, if you're looking more for a PDF, consistently always updated, tier draft list updates, your consistency reports that you can get off the website that you can put in your own scoring method and find out who the most consistent players, tight ends, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, are in your scoring league or your scoring method in your league. You can do that on the site as well. And all of that very reasonably priced. The guide on the website is $8.99. The VIP package is only $19.99. Again, if you buy the book on Amazon, email me the receipt, which somebody just did actually right before the show started tonight. And I send you a nice little coupon code, and it gets you the VIP upgrade for only $10. So you're still only paying $20 whether you buy the book online or you buy the book on the website. So that's why a lot of people are buying it on Amazon. So, but other than that, like I said, next week next week is Hall of Fame week, and so we'll be doing a show probably Sunday or Monday and having that up for you. And then I will be off for my other fantasy football weekend, which is the fantasy of driving Hall of Famers around. I will be driving Brian Dawkins this year, and I'm looking forward to that. So all you Eagle fans, be jealous. And if you're in town, certainly hit me up on Twitter, and we'll meet up and say hi, and appreciate you doing that. If you happen to be coming to Canton, certainly let me know. And then the week after that, I go to New York City for the Fantasy League of Experts draft in New York at Sirius Radio. That will be live on Sirius Radio on August 11th. I think both drafts will be live. I'm drafting the noon spot. And then the week after that is the Kings X Classic Fantasy Football Expert Draft in Canton, Ohio, my hometown, at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And good friend Ron will be there. Colby Conway will be there representing Fantistics and representing Fantasy Alarm, as well as Brad Evans from Yahoo, Mike Clay from ESPN, David Ricard from CBS Sports, or Richard. Is it Dave Richard or is it Dave Ricard?
Good question. I don't know.
Okay. All right. I thought it was. I can't remember. I know I've heard it. That's why I was like, I wanted to say it's Ricard, but anyway, he's going to be there. A lot of other big names will be there as well, representing the big sites, and that will be an all-day live on SiriusXM. So make sure if you have Fantasy Sports Radio, or if you don't, get it before the upcoming weekend, so that you have it for the month of December or month of August, and for the whole football season. You're going to need it, because hopefully I'll be on the shows quite a bit, but we're definitely going to be doing a lot of drafts live, and so we're looking forward to that. Ron will be making the trip to Canton, Ohio, so we're excited about that. So yes. So should be a good time. So Ron, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, Twitter-wise, fantasy baseball-wise, fantasy football-wise, and then we'll kind of call it a night.
Yeah, Chet, you can find me on Twitter at TheRealMaday, M-A-D-A-Y. Hit me up on there. I had a little break with the All-Star break going on over Fantistics, but I'll be back doing the player profiles tomorrow night. Those will be posted on Friday, so you can get your recap. I believe I have the AL this week of what happened in the American League Thursday night. We just did the Fantrax Dynasty Baseball podcast and the Nasty Cast Fantasy Baseball pod last night. Those, I believe, just got put up a little bit ago by our resident producer extraordinaire Van Lee, and our host Nathan Dokken on there as well. So you can find those if you're still in baseball mode. Hopefully you haven't given up completely on baseball yet. Hopefully you're still in it.
I'm trying.
I know we're kind of getting to that point where you got to kind of pull the plug or make that push, kind of like the real teams are at the deadline. So you can find me those places, and we'll be back next week starting to talk about draft prep. And I'm going to hopefully be able to guide you as far as when you draft one of those top quarterbacks, who you're going to be able to look at for your bye weeks and who's going to be your most consistent option in your bye weeks.
Awesome. All right. Well, as I mentioned before, you can find me at Bob_Lung on Twitter. Email me at bob@bigguyfantasysports.com. I'm starting to put together the series from last year, what's called the Perfectly Consistent Draft. So I'm going to go pick by pick 1 through 12, and show you how, through utilizing the mock draft and Fantasy Pros, how that you can not only draft a very good team that will be ranked number 1 overall in their scoring and their scenario, but also will be very consistent as well. So I'm calling it the Perfectly Consistent Draft. So don't forget, that will be coming out soon. I'll start doing picks 1, 2, all the way through 12. Hopefully have all of those done probably by the second week of August, which should be prime draft time, and then update those if necessary. But we'll be going over that as well. So once again, for Ron Rigney, I'm Bob Lung. Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Football Consistency Show, and we will see you again next week. Take care. God bless. We'll see you soon.